Hi everyone, my name is Christina. I am a career counselor at UCLA. Welcome to the Pre-Health Application Week. Today's presentation is Mcat in the Hat, AZ Mcat. The agenda for this event is a little introduction, which was already done, about pre-health application week announcements. And now I'm inviting the Altius representatives to start their presentation, and I will stop share. Please make sure that you have any questions regarding the presentation to put it in the Q&A. So Jesse, Brian, take it over.
Thank you so much. I just want to appreciate everybody for joining today. My name is Brian Muir. You'll notice just a slight adjustment to the presenters today. But I just want to give a quick introduction. I am the Altius representative for UCLA. So any questions you have pertaining to the MCAT, Altius, admissions, I'm happy to assist all you students. So I'm going to throw my information in the chat here in just a minute, so that if you have any questions, you can reach out to me and let me know. I also, real quick, am going to open this up right here, just to quickly share with you some of the information that we have going on this month at Altius. For those that are taking their test in the next couple months, we have our elite course that's offered. It's 32 classroom sessions over a 7-week period of time with multiple one-on-one sessions with an individual that scored between a 515 and 528 on their MCAT. Offered each month from now through July, usually $2,400 or $2,500. Running a sale this month, bringing that down to $1,899 for students. Also, if you're testing this this fall, our summer immersion courses, we are offering free airfare to attend these courses in any of the following cities. I want to throw a link into the chat as well with some more information on this. So if you get a chance to read through that and you have any questions, you can reach out to me and let me know. And then we'd be happy to help you out. Since we don't have a whole lot of time, I do want to give the remainder of the time over to Jesse. He's going to give you some great insights on the MCAT and preparations and best practices, how to help you. And then we'll both be on at the end here for a Q&A. Thank you so much. Thanks for being here. And Jesse, the rest of the time's yours.
Perfect. We always love a nice brief introduction to get started into stuff. So little intro about me. So I majored in neuroscience at BYU. I've been tutoring with Altius for the last 2 years because I took a gap year and then I applied after my senior year. I'm going to be going to med school this fall. And just as of right now, I'm just working full-time with Altius, just trying to help them out with mentoring students and essentially making sure that people can get through this next hurdle in life. My goal essentially today is to, in this like 1 hour, hour and a half chunk that I have for you, to give you the best tidbits of advice that I can give in order for you to apply directly towards your study and get point increases. We know that the MCAT is a tough exam, that it is 8 hours long, that there's 4 different sections, and that it does not cater towards the normal weaknesses that students have when studying for the MCAT. So for example, the most common issue that pre-med students have is that we are professional procrastinators. We are really, really good at not studying for a midterm until about 2 or 3 days before, and then we will bonsai study for it. We will like crank it down for a day and a half, do really well. We will memorize, regurgitate, and then we'll dump it all off and then never think about it again. So you might be thinking about, like, for example, all your pKa values and titrations from your first Gen Chem class, or like circuits and Kirchhoff's junction rule, magnetic right hand rules. Like those are all stuff where you're like, okay, it's in the periphery of my noggin, but like I now need to apply to this exam. It's been a hot minute. So the MCAT does take more than just procrastination. You have to be able, over a steady amount of time, be able to study for this exam and overcome it. A couple of aspects to take into account is the fact that this exam is 8 hours. So at a certain point, they've debated the options of having a shorter exam or a longer exam. They find that 8 hours is right around that drop-off point where if you were not prepping yourself for the stamina aspect, that you will kind of fall off the board a little bit when you take this exam. Around 4 to 6 hours, some students can generally kind of struggle through it and do fine. But 8 hours, that's where you're just going to be making a lot of dingus mistakes and just kind of falling off the wagon a little bit. So with that, I'm going to be talking about different strategies that we need to apply in order to make sure that we don't have those issues. So I'm going to be throwing this into the chat.
Jesse, just make sure that you choose everyone when you are putting things in the chat. Otherwise, it's only a limiting amount of people that can see it.
Perfect. Yeah, I just barely switched that over. So I will talk about the first little snippet here. So first off, I want to talk about question strategy. So I know this sounds like a super basic move, like you guys are good at taking exams. You already know how to break down questions, but you would be amazed by how many little mistakes that students make when you're taking an 8-hour exam. You have to make sure that you simplify things so you don't answer the wrong question. So looking right here, this is the typical strategy that we're going to be going for. Rephrase, foreshadow, 50-50, confirm. The reason for that is because the first section of the MCAT is CP, so it's going to be Chem Phys. It is typically more complicated. So what are you going to do? You're going to overthink it. You're going to answer the wrong question. You're going to be thinking about it in the wrong direction. So we have that aspect at the beginning of the exam. And then at the end, we have Psych Soc, which is typically considered the easier section on the MCAT. But it's after you've been testing for 7+ hours. So like you're going to be making mistakes like you've never had before. Like the way I look at it is that like, if you're walking on the sidewalk, like, yeah, if you're walking on a sidewalk for 1 hour, you're probably pretty fine. But if I tell you to go walk on the sidewalk and like walk along the street for 7.5, 8 hours, you're going to start tripping over yourself, falling off the curb, walking onto the grass, that sort of stuff. So we have to kind of simplify things and make sure that we are doing the right thing. So with that, I'm going to pop open a couple of practice problems just to kind of give us that aspect or that practice before we get into the practice. So let me find the exact problems I want to work through. Give me 1 sec. And there we go. Okay, let me pull it up and share. Okay, so in typical MCAT fashion, we only get 1 minute for testing. So we got our first practice problem. So I'm going to set a timer on my phone and I can give all y'all 1 minute to try to answer this question. Starting in 3, 2, 1, and go. You got 1 minute to try to answer this question. Last 20 seconds. Last 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and time. So 1 minute does not feel like a whole lot of time, so we have to make sure that our reading speed is kind of up to par for it. So we got a survey that finds that immigrants report fewer symptoms of depression and anxiety than individuals from the same racial ethnic group who were born in the United States. So we've got immigrant versus US born. So we're going to be thinking that the main things that are going to be different is their ability to assimilate or their length of time that they have been in the US. Because we've got to think fundamentals, what is the difference between the two groups when we've got some numbers. So which correlation best describes this finding? So positive correlation, meaning that one number goes up, the other must go up. So example would be like if the weather during the summer, the temperature goes up, the sales of ice cream also go up as well. I know this seems like a weird, easy move, but almost every time in a psych social question and I see positive and negative correlation, I put my fingers up just because we don't want to get things mixed up. So foreshadowing this one, that it has to do with some sort of aspect of a length of stay or their ability to assimilate. So we've got positive correlation with socioeconomic status and assimilation. So the more money that you have, you're better able to assimilate. So is that a main difference that we have between immigrant groups versus US born groups? I don't think there's a huge money aspect in there. So A is a maybe, we don't like it too much. Negative correlation and between assimilation, so the more assimilated you are, the worse your health status goes down. So your health status goes down. Okay, so we're kind of liking that one because it's dealing with assimilation. See a positive correlation between culture shock. So we got the more shocked you are coming to the US, and socioeconomic status, so you have more money. So the more shocked you are, the more money you have. And that one doesn't quite make sense. And then D, a negative correlation between health status. So as health status goes up, we have less culture shock. So once again, that doesn't kind of make as much sense. So we're really only kind of between like B and A's are 50-50, but if you kept your fingers straight and you were able to run it through, you would have seen that B is the correct answer. So the more assimilated we are, so if we are US born and more assimilated, our health status goes down. We're more likely to have anxiety and depression. So you kind of see right there that you want to rephrase, you want to foreshadow the direction that you think they're going to be testing. And then you're going to go to your 50-50 confirm. The reason why this strategy works, so almost every question on the MCAT has some component of logic and simplification. So like example, my wife is a barber. She has not touched an OChem class. She had not touched an OChem, like any of those aspects of those types of exams. But I've talked to her enough times about the MCAT of like running through passages. She's heard me work through different students, and I can put a passage in front of her. And even though she doesn't know any of the content, does not have even an idea of how to define different stuff, she can normally just off of logic and rephrasing at least get to a 50-50. So that is always going to be your goal on every question that you work through. So that is our first little tidbit of advice on our first strategy that we're working through. Okay. Next aspect that we're going to be talking about note taking. So we will start off with note taking for science, and I'll throw this in the chat as well. So note taking. So first off, specifically, let's start with sciences. So CP, BB, and Psych Soc. Any passage that you get, you only get 8 minutes on it. So depending on how long you're able to read depends on the number of questions that you have. So for a question passage, you get 4 minutes to read the passage. But if it is a 6-question passage, that means you only get 2 minutes to read and then a minute per question running through. When we are running through and taking notes and highlighting, we are focusing specifically on those key players, relationships, and buzzwords. And then when you are creating your notes, it should look and reflect a flow chart. Arrows, symbols, simplifications. We're not trying to write full words. If you feel like you're writing full words and you're writing full-on sentences and sciences, you're probably writing too much and wasting time. We should be using symbols, tiny abbreviations, arrows and symbols to kind of be able to simplify that information. So to kind of take that into perspective, let's pop open the free sample test that everyone gets from the AAMC. So let me see if I can open that up. Okay, so right here, we have the very first passage on the sample MCAT. So when I'm looking at this passage right here, if I'm looking to highlight, so there is always a trick on your laptop that's Command H. I believe if you have like a Dell or another computer that isn't an Apple, I think it's like Option H. It's a quick aspect to be able to highlight stuff. So we got right in there, we got highlight. We should have that option. We got a spartal protease. We got a spartate side group, cleavable peptide, HIV protease. So I'm just showing you exactly what I would have been highlighting if I'm working through this passage, because I'm just trying to focus in on getting those key players, relationships, and buzzwords. My goal when I read through a passage is to guess the direction that they are going to test me, because the way that they make this exam is that they find a passage, they end up reformatting it to make it sound like the MCAT, And then they create a question bank. And from that question bank, they decide on the 4 to 6 questions that they want to have on there, which means that if you get good enough at reading these passages and studying, you're going to be able to guess the direction that things are going to be testing before you even get to the question, kind of priming that information. So even just on this first little paragraph, I see protease. Okay, so they're talking about protease, breaking down proteins, aspartyl, something about aspartic acid, protease, aspartate right here. So now the rabbit hole that I'm going to be going down is I now know that anything related to amino acids is now a fair game topic to be tested. So I make sure that I have all of my amino acids memorized, my full words, my 3-letter abbreviations, 1-letter abbreviations, and structures. And I see right here, okay, next thing we got homodimer. So that's going to be referring to our different types of protein structures. So I know that there's primary, secondary, tertiary, quaternary. And dimer is referring to quaternary structure. So I'm like, okay, now anything about protein structure is now fair game as well. I look at this right here. Anytime I see a molecule or a graph, my rule of thumb is 10 to 15 seconds. We don't know whether it's going to be tested, but normally in 10, 15 seconds, you can summarize the generic information we have there. If we later on have a question about it, we will go back and use part of that minute to help us interpret that information. So I see right here, I got phenylalanine. Looks like I got asparagine, phenylalanine, proline. I see right here, that's going to be glutamine, isoleucine. So I'm like, okay, I got these different structures. And I see proline. Proline's got a special buzzwords associated with it that it disrupts secondary structure. So it's going to mess up alpha helices and beta plated sheets. So that's just kind of like the additional information that we're going to have. And I'm guessing already they're going to test something on amino acids, proteases, quaternary structure, or something relating to proline. Even just looking through these questions, we got stereoisomers, we got kidney stones. We're talking about KSP here so far. And we got an amino acid question. So just me guessing that first paragraph, I've already guessed that one of the questions is going to be related to amino acids, and I was ready for it. Okay. So that is my rule of thumb, and let's pop out to what a CAR passage is going to be looking like. So the rules that I set for my students when it comes to CARs, you are not allowed to highlight in CARs. You can highlight all you want in sciences, but CARs, it will be to your detriment. And the reason is this: what is your strong suit when you're working through on a research paper and whenever you're having to read anything for a textbook? Every pre-med student is so good at being able to scan the information and find the one sentence of information that we need. And with that one sentence of information, we extrapolate all of our data, everything we need for our PowerPoint and for that exam. But the CARS section of the Mcat is an antithesis to that skill. Whereas you have a full passage right there, and you only have 4 minutes to read it. And if you hyper focus on any one aspect, it'll be to your detriment, because you need to be able to get a generic main idea, tone, and author understanding. So just understand that we need to go for more main idea and tone as opposed to focusing in on any one sentence. And if you're highlighting, you're going to be reinforcing that bad skill, reinforcing a bad aspect, where we have to look at the macro perspective, not the micro. So when it comes to CARs, we will not highlight. And I'm going to put the little strats on there. There we go. So for CARs, we get 4 minutes to read the passage, no matter what. But we get a minute per question on that passage. So if there's a 5-question passage, that means you get 4 minutes to read, and then you get an additional 5 minutes to be able to run through this question. So you get a total of 9 minutes. As a rule of thumb, you should always keep a timing chart in your top right-hand corner. Essentially meaning, let me see if I can pull this up. That if I have my passage right here, and it's like, okay, we're going right here, it's reading through, it's a 1 through 5 type questions, and on my set of notes that I have over here, whatever you're doing for your normal notes is totally fine, but in that top right-hand corner, you are going to put a timing chart, and you're going to figure out, like, quickly in like 2 to 3 seconds when you first start a passage, figure out how much time do you have left. So if this is a science passage right here, that means no matter what, I'm going to get 8 minutes on this. So I'm going to subtract 8 minutes. I need to be out of this by 1 hour 27. So I now know it's like, okay, as I'm working through this, I can keep track of my timer and be able to see like, I need to be out and done with this passage by 1 hour 27. Let's say that I have some standalones. That's now 6 through 9. So I'm like, okay, so standalones, I get 1 minute per question, 6, 7, 8, 9. So I get 4 minutes to be able to work through those questions. I need to be out and done by 1 hour 23. So this seems basic, but like I cannot emphasize it enough of how important it is to keep a timing chart. First off, the reason why is because while you're studying and prepping for the MCAT, how will you ever know what a true weakness is if you're always messing up on your timing? So like, let's say that like you start scoring in this 495 range, that 497 range when you're first practicing, but like you ran through a section, you ran out of time on that last 2 passages, and so you never even had a chance to actually put in solid effort on there. So when you are first working and practice for the MCAT, you need to start solidifying your timing so you make sure that you do not run out of time in each section. Because otherwise, you could have wasted a bunch of extra time on the hard passages at the beginning, and there was a couple of easy ones in the middle or towards the end, but you were running out of time. So therefore, you were trying to do an 8-minute passage in 4 minutes, which even for someone who's experienced with the MCAT is like nearly impossible. You're practically having to guess. So keep your timings is my first big suggestion. Okay. And then if you're looking at the chat, what I put in there for notes, there are like 3 different ways that you could go about this. There is the snake method, the paragraph summary method, or the main idea method. And every student has a different preference that they might have. What that essentially means is that, like, for example, for the snake method, is that when I'm reading through a passage, I'm just kind of writing generic like, oh, government up, and like, okay, people angry down. I'm keeping it to like 1 or 2 words and trying to keep it nice and simple of like, okay, we got Kant equals angry. So I'm like, I'm keeping it to like every time I hit an idea or something that strikes me within a paragraph, I write down my 1 to 2 words of what I would use to kind of help me summarize that information. And you're just going to see that like this way of note taking just kind of snakes its way around the passage. Some paragraphs only get 1 to 2 words, while other ones get several little jots downs of notes and stuff. And the purpose behind doing this reading process is all for active reading. Because admittedly, when you are getting to the top level of the MCAT and you're operating on all cylinders, you will not be looking back at your notes all that much for cars. But if you might remember, how many items can we hold in our short-term memory? And it's 7 plus or minus 2. So that means like on a dumb day, we're only able to hold 5 items in our short-term memory. So when you're reading a passage and you can only hold 5 items in your short-term memory, like we don't know if those are the right aspects of the passage that you need to answer those questions. But our note taking allows us to kind of add more things to our working memory so we can get up to 7, 8, 9, maybe even push the limits towards 10, 11, 12. So then you have enough information between your noggin and between your notes to kind of frame out the information you need for that passage. So note taking for cars is purely to your benefit to increasing that working memory. So you're ready to kind of go for it. And so that little idea of paragraph summary, main idea, snake method is essentially just different ways for different students that they like to take notes to increasing that working memory capacity. So with that, that would be like my big snippets of advice for that. And so looking at, so great question on asking about whether we should read the questions before the passage. Some people like that just to be able to kind of gauge the direction, but I prefer and I advise my students to read the passage first, because getting a main idea and tone will help you to be able to answer about 80% of those questions. Whereas sometimes if you read the questions before you get into the passage, you're already gearing up of what you should be looking for, and you might actually hyper focus on the wrong sentence. So I would say it's kind of a beginner thing to kind of help you get an idea, but I would typically advise do the passage first, read it, get it done in under 4 minutes, have your main idea and tone ready in your noggin, and then tackle those questions. So perfect. Okay, so we just got our first little chunk of kind of reviewing and running through questions. Just gonna give you guys just a couple minutes if you want to throw some questions in the Q&A for a sec, if you have any questions relating to something that I have talked about. Because our next section that we're gonna get into is the testing section. So I'm gonna give you guys just a little bit of time if you want to throw some questions in the Q&A. I believe all of y'all should have already been able to have received the sample passages that we're testing today. But if you don't, I will post the link to the Google Doc in the chat so you can pull it up that way. Yeah, okay, great question on CARS. So exactly what is CARS? So CARS stands for Critical Analysis and Reading Skills. So imagine like AP literature or like any sort of like the English section of like standardized exams you've taken in the past, but like the hardest version of it for the MCAT. Just to give you an example of what those passages might look like. So I'll actually pop open, let's take a look at that sample exam once again. So let's actually skip and I'll give you a look of what a CARS section looks like. Let's section, yes, CARS, and there you go. So right here, for example, we have a 7-question passage right here. So that means that we would get 11 minutes total to do this whole passage. So 4 minutes to read. So you would only get 4 minutes to read all of this and synthesize it. And then you would then have a minute per question. And you can kind of see like the question types we have. The passage implies as some observers. We could have authors suggest that concluding that diet is responsible for heart disease would be what? So that first one was kind of talking about implications of like, okay, who is this random person mentioned in that first paragraph? The second question was asking about one of the arguments made by the author. This one, we have a Roman numeral option, where it's talking about when we're talking about errands, or some random person that was mentioned in the passage, like what were they essentially pointing to? So what was the purpose of what they were explaining? So you kind of see it's like they are kind of pinpointing aspects of the passage, but there's also generically they're going to be looking easily digestible carbohydrates. You're gonna be looking at that one. It's like, okay, this is one argument that the author made. How does it apply to the main idea or how the author is approaching this information? So that is kind of like what a CARS session looks like. There is going to be, if you look at the navigation right here, there is going to be 53 questions on it. So you have an hour 30 to run through it. And essentially the timing works out perfect if you follow the rules that I just kind of talked about with timing rules. 4 minutes to read, minute per question, and you have to do the math on each section, on each passage, just to double check that you're doing the right timing rules and you're keeping your right timing. Because when it comes to CARS, you'll hear the generic advice of like, yeah, just average it out to 10 minutes a passage. But if you do that, and let's say it's only like a 4-question passage, so technically you're only supposed to be using 8 minutes on it, but you're using the generic rule of 10. So that means you're using an additional 2 minutes that you shouldn't on that first passage, and that's later on in the section is going to kick you in the butt, and you're going to get in trouble because you're going to run out of time towards the end. You're going to be like, I don't understand why I'm keeping the 10-minute rule when you shouldn't. It has to be 4 minutes a passage, a minute per question, and you have to do the math. So, okay, and then, so specific advice for formulating the main idea for CARS. Ooh, that's a great, so specific advice for that. Lots and lots of practice would be my first thing. Like you try to find as many CARS passages to read, and under that 4 minutes, when I'm formulating my main idea, I am trying to read my passage in about 3.5 minutes, 3 minutes and 40 seconds, and I spend that extra 15, 20 trying to answer 2 questions. First is, what would be my one sentence simplification? Like, how would I simplify this into one sentence? And then the second question is, why did the author even bother putting words on the page? Like, what was their purpose? Were they persuading us? Were they just giving us like a history textbook lesson? Were they trying to persuade us on a way of life? If you can figure out what the one sentence simplification is and the motives behind the author, you will have a good generic idea that you can then apply to each question. So that would be, so to answer that question in full, lots of practice and near daily practice. Practicing cars is similar to brushing your teeth. It doesn't help to do it all on the weekends. If you can do it daily for like 15 to 20 minutes, up to 30 minutes, like 5 days a week, and you're doing that consistently throughout whatever study program that you're doing, you're just kind of like putting in your daily efforts towards working towards that goal and being better in cars. Okay, and then recommend taking an Mcat Diagnostic. Yes, so practice exams will be, in whatever program you do, one of the most valuable resources that you have. And depending on who you use, like for example, Altius, we hired out people who wrote for the Mcat, and they wrote us out 10 practice exams and over like 50 mini exams and stuff. So Altius is one resource. The AAMC has, I believe, 4 practice exam, a sample exam, and then they have a bunch of question packs. Whenever you do start studying for the MCAT, no matter which program that you end up doing, the very first weekend, you should take a practice exam just to figure out where do you stand in your studying, and it gives you a good grand perspective of it. So I would say it would not be a bad idea to take a practice exam, but don't take them willy-nilly. You are going to be like, they are a valuable resource. So you want to stagger them out throughout your program, but I do recommend that one of the first things you do when you start whatever program is you take a practice exam. So it gives you an idea of what that 8 hours feels like, what you need to study, and then you can kind of start tackling weaknesses from there. So yes. So there's a few different resources that you can find. Straight from the horse's mouth, you can go to the AAMC. They have practice materials. There is, of course, the company that I work for and who I mentor for. Altius has a lot of practice exams and different deals that they want to run through. Especially with you guys coming to this seminar today, Altius is offering a bunch of discounts because they want to kind of help out students over at the UCLA area. We got AMC, Altius. There are other ones, like we have Kaplan is some common names. We got Kaplan, UWorld, and those are some bigger names that we have. Jack Weston is some other options as well. Honestly, the very best and valuable resources will be the AAMC. And then the ones that I'm most familiar with and I've used for tutoring is Altius. So that's where I would find resources if you're looking for some practice materials. And then when answering extrapolation type questions, do you answer based off of the main idea or specific evidence in the passage? Ooh, that is a great question. So if you're extrapolating or you're reasoning beyond the text, if we're talking about like main level skills of how we would stagger of like our progression of what makes a good, better, best type car student, first step that you should be getting, first step will be get your main idea and tone in line. That'll be your first step that you're trying to work through. Second will be, do you understand your author? And then once you got those first 2 steps mastered, that third step is tracking arguments. So that kind of like, that somewhat answers your question in the aspect of like, when you have to extrapolate or reason beyond the text, your foundation is main idea and tone, because any of the answers in the questions has to fall in line with the tone that you see in the passage. So if the or if the passage is very extreme and like persuading you to do these heavy actions, then the answers in the question sets should also reflect that same tone. So main idea and tone is what I'm looking at first. Then I'm looking at the motives of the author. And then third, finally, would be tracking those individual arguments and why did the author use these arguments throughout the passage? Because we're assuming that these authors are smart people and they wouldn't reference things just willy-nilly without it aiding the passage somehow. So I would go first main idea, because that should at least get you a 50-50. And then specific evidence in the passage is probably what's going to help you confirm that 50-50. Okay, solid. That was a lot of really good questions, and let's get into testing and reviewing now. And then we'll have some more time for questions towards the end as well. Just double check. Yes. Okay, so all of y'all, I put into the chat the 2 Google links. There is the sample passage for bio and for cars. Cars, I believe, is 7 questions, which means that you get 11 minutes for cars. 4 minutes to read and 1 minute per question. So this is one of the few times in a seminar that I'm going to tell you, pull out your phones. And you're going to set an 11-minute timer when you get into that. Biology is going to be just 1 passage, which means you only get 8 minutes for it. So total, you only get 19 minutes to test, but I want you to set an individual timer for cars, run through cars, and then you're going to stop for a sec, take a breather for 30 seconds, transition over to bio, and then start an 8-minute timer, get into testing there. So before we kind of get into that, what we're sitting at, you guys are on Pacific time, which is 12:44. So essentially, I'm going to just round it to an even 20 minutes. So we are going to start at, I'm going to say, because what time is looking like right now. So let's start at 12:45 right here. And then we will come back at 1:05 p.m. PST right there. So that gives you 20 minutes to test. You can use your timers. I'm going to put myself on mute and turn off my camera, but you are more than welcome to send me messages in the Q&A and I will answer them if you have any problems. But other than that, you guys can get started into testing, and then when y'all come back, we'll get into reviewing and how we should have been able to break down those 2 passages. Okay. If everyone is good, I'll keep an eye out for the questions I might get in the Q&A or in the chat. And I will see you all back in about 20 minutes. I did, but let me drop them again. So let's look. Top one. I think that one is just the bio one. I'll drop them again real quick. So this one, this first one is going to be the bio passage. And then this right here, copy link, done. It's going to be the car passage. There we go. Okay, so we get the bio passage and the car passage right there in the chat. Perfect. Okay, then I will keep an eye out on the chat and I'll put myself on mute. Let me know if you have any questions. Y'all are good to start testing.
Jesse, we are at 1 o'clock.
Oops, sorry, say that again.
We are at 1 o'clock. So the webinar was 12 to 1.
Oh, I was under the understanding that it was a 2-hour seminar.
No, it's a 1 hour one.
Oh, I am so sorry. I was under the assumption it was a 2-hour seminar that they're coming back to review.
Not really.
Sorry, I am super, super sorry about that. For everyone that's still in here, I will put explanations to everything in the sample test that we had. And I'll put explanations in there. We did give contact info of Brian and for anyone else that wants to reach out for anyone in Altius. And if Brian does have any sort of closing words, and then we'll just head it off and we'll end the seminar. I'm so sorry about that. I completely thought it was a 2-hour seminar, but sorry.
Brian, do you have anything closing information for our students?
I don't believe so. I think he is currently on a call real quick, but the information that he put in the chat, if you do have any sort of questions, feel free to reach out to any one of our representatives. He mentioned it out. It was, I'll re-put that information in the chat, and you are more than welcome to be able to reach out if you have any sort of questions.